Greetings and salutations, this is Imperator Vespasian and his trusty sidekick.
Hello.
We have in front of you some Finnish infantry for bolt action. We did the unboxing video a while back. I've only just got around to finishing them, and here they are. They're done in sort of standard Finnish colours, although I've given a few of them white helmets to blend in a little bit better with the sort of later war theme.
Scenery.
Yeah. I just thought it would look slightly better that way. I like the Finnish helmets because they're like the World War I German helmets.
Wow.
They have the screws in the side, which is quite cool.
The World War I German helmets had spiker top.
That wasn't a helmet, that was a cap. It was made out of cardboard. The World War I helmet was the actual tin helmet, which is basically almost the same helmet they used in World War II. But anyway, that's besides the point. The figures are from Warlord Games, and they come in a nice little blister pack, and you put them all together. I have added 2 soldiers to this. I've tried to figure out that one, and that one is the officer. It's very much like the actual officer you get in the pack. The reason for that is that the Finnish army had 12-man squads, so I had to add 2 figures to the box, which is just something I had to do. Finnish infantry are much the same as most other infantry, although you can mount them on skis, making them move as cavalry, which is quite cool. And you can also upgrade them to tank hunters by giving them anti-tank grenades. So they're actually quite good early war troops.
They look good.
Yeah. Finland began the war with a very small army, and when it looked like war was going to break out, they mobilised the army and they brought in conscription. And they brought a load of soldiers in, trained them up, and sent them out quite quickly. So a lot of Finnish troops would actually have not had a huge amount of decent training, although most Finns would have had some form of training, due to the history of Finland. So the Finnish troops were quite good. They were fighting for their homeland, and troops who are fighting for their homeland tend to be slightly better motivated than troops who are fighting simply because they're in the army. Yeah. What should I mention next?
How the war went against the Russians.
Oh, right. Okay.
It was mostly infantry.
Yes. Finland didn't have a huge amount of tanks, and for the terrain, they didn't need them.
The tanks they did have were either from Russian destroyed, broken down vehicles, or uncaptured ones, or supplied by the Nazis.
As the war went on, they did get German equipment, but when the war broke out, the Germans wouldn't supply the Finns because the Germans were allied to the Russians. So I mentioned this in the other first video we did of these, as Ribbentrop met Molotov, and Molotov said, "Do not trust the Finns." He didn't like the Finns at all, and he didn't want the Germans getting involved. The British did try to support the Finns. They sent them Hurricanes, and they sent them, I think, some Spitfires as well. And of course Finland bought the Vickers light tank from the British, which they just used as a testing tank. They didn't really use them in combat. But it did allow them to give their troops some experience of using armoured vehicles, for the point where they actually captured armoured vehicles. But Finland is not the best place to use tanks. There's a lot of woodland. The roads are single traffic roads. They're not suited for tank warfare. And the Russians used tanks en masse and lost because of it, because they tried to rely on tanks, and tanks are not the best thing. When the war started, the Finns effectively had 3 separate areas of operation. They had the southern area around the Karelian Isthmus. They had the central area, which was a huge open border with Russia, mainly made up of trees, so not the best terrain, and then the northern area. And the Finns expected the Russians all to come up through the Karelian Isthmus because that's where the roads were, and that's where it's most sensible for the Russians to come. But the Russians actually attacked everywhere at the same time, which is another problem the Russians had. They had everyone advancing at the same time. They had no command and control. So the Finns were able to react quicker than the much smaller Finnish army was able to react and manoeuvre quicker than the Russian army. The commander of the northern group, he didn't want to be in command. He was a backwoodsman. He was a light infantryman, and they put him in charge. And he said he didn't want to be in charge. They put him in charge anyway. He instantly became an alcoholic and eventually had to be relieved of command. So the northern group was really operating independently. Each platoon really didn't have any command and control, and that actually benefited the Finns, because the Finns were able to operate without anyone looking over the shoulder. And they would ski out into the wilderness and they would ambush Russian troops and then they would just ski back again. The Russians, because it was so cold, burnt their skis. All the Russian soldiers were given skis. But as soon as the Russians bedded down, they burnt their skis to keep themselves warm. So, yeah, it's not going to work. The Finns were mounted on skis. The Finns also used reindeer to pull artillery and things like that, so they could manoeuvre quicker. The Russians tried to use horses. The horses died in the snow. They just froze to death, or they were killed and eaten. And the Russian vehicles were wheeled. The Russians didn't have many tracked vehicles for transporting equipment. Their tanks were tracked, but their trucks weren't. And so the Russian trucks would just get stuck in the snow and not move. They should really have attacked in summer. That would have been much better for the Russians. But they chose to attack in the winter. Oh, well, not quite winter, but it is Northern Europe, so you got a lot of snow. Yeah. So given this is the early war, you can use these figures more or less all over. It's really up to you which bit you do. If you do the later war, then the Finnish army wasn't really as good as the Finnish army in the beginning of the war. Because the Finns were not fighting offensively. They didn't really have any interest in sort of beating the Russians. Well, simply because it would mean they would have to move troops too far away from their lines of communication.
They did in the end.
No, not really. They just withdrew in good order. They did get all the way to Murmansk. They could have taken Murmansk, but they didn't. Because if they had taken Murmansk, then they would have to have kept Murmansk supplied, and they didn't have the ability to do that. They didn't have any ships that could sail around the top, so they would have to have sailed around Norway, pardon me, to get to the Murmansk. And there was no overland routes either. So even if they would have taken the city, which they could have taken it given the small garrison that the Russians had there, but how would they have held it? The Russians would have just retaken it and all the troops in Murmansk would have been lost. So it wasn't really to their benefit to actually do that. Of course, they were thinking short term. They were just thinking of Finland's interests, not for the interests of the Axis powers, because Finland wasn't an Axis power. They were just they were fighting the same war. They weren't actually allies. Britain was an ally, and early on, the British and French tried to get troops into Finland to fight the Russians. And Norway and Sweden refused. They wouldn't allow British troops across their territory. So the British then decided to send some troops with ships around, but they didn't actually arrive in time. Had they arrived earlier, Britain could have found itself at war with Russia at the time of the outbreak of war with Poland.
Which means that Britain would have been on Germany's side.
Yes. Well, no, I don't think we would have been allied to Germany, but just like the Finns, we would have been fighting the same war.
So it means Axis would have won.
Yeah, the Finns were never... They were never Nazis. They were just on the sides. Jewish troops fought in the Finnish army.
And that means Hitler would have never had to bother about France because France would have been an Axis power.
Well, France did kind of become an Axis power, didn't it?
Yeah, that's how they got conquered.
France was a bit stupid getting into the war in the first place, because they never had the manpower to fight a war. After the end of the First World War, the French didn't have children. So, because the war had been so horrible and so many men had died, there just wasn't a growth in birth rates. Britain, there was a growth in birth rates, and Germany, there was a slight growth in birth rates, not as much as Britain. And that's where all the soldiers came from to fight the Second World War. So Russia had huge amounts of troops because they had a growth in birth rates. The French didn't. The French just didn't have any children. And, well, look at France today. It's just going the same way. So France didn't have the manpower to actually fight a long-term war. 2/3 of the French army were not combat troops. They couldn't use them in combat. And whenever the French tried to use them, they fell apart. The Finns made a point of not sending the least reliable troops into combat. They would always keep them on reserve. Because the Finns, I think the Finns lost about 25,000 men during the Winter War. So it's quite a lot of casualties they took. But they could have lost a hell of a lot more. And a lot of the casualties were taken when the Finns actually tried to counterattack. They tried to attack. After the Russians were defeated during the original attack, the Finns tried to chase them off, tried to follow them up. And that's when a lot of the Finnish casualties were taken. Because they were fighting in the open, they didn't have any tanks, they didn't have any anti-aircraft guns, not mobile ones, and their air force wasn't really up to an offensive war. So, yeah, they lost. But, yeah. They did fight the Russians to a standstill. Eventually the Russians did start to take Finnish territory, and then Russia sued for peace with Finland. And they effectively signed the same treaty, more or less, that was offered to the Finns originally. Stalin had gone to the Finns just before the war and said, we need half of your country, basically, and then we'll leave you alone, and the Finns said no. And that's what started the war in the first place. They ended up signing the same thing at the end, after hundreds of thousands of dead Russians.
Yeah.
And it also massively embarrassed the Russian army. It made Stalin's army look weak, which may have helped the Germans think that they actually stood a chance against the Russians, which turned out to not be the case.
It was though.
Well, it wasn't, was it? Because they lost.
They lost because of winter.
No, they didn't lose because of winter.
And they did.
God, why don't people always say that? You do know it snows in Germany.
No, the Germans lost because of winter because they thought they could have taken Moscow just before winter hit.
They stopped before Moscow because they couldn't hold Moscow for the same reason that the Finns couldn't hold Murmansk.
The only reason they wanted to get Moscow was to arrest Stalin.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you arrest Stalin, Russia falls, they win World War II.
Yeah, Moscow would have been a total bloodbath, wouldn't it? Because the communists would have just fought to the death. Because just like the Nazis in Berlin, the reason they all died was because they were fought to the death, because they were Nazis. And the communists in Russia would have died the same way. So Moscow would have been like Berlin. It would have been an absolute bloodbath. But with less assaults on women. But so it would have been horrible. So had the Germans managed to get into Moscow, I don't think they would have had enough men to actually take the city. And even if they had taken the city, how could they hold it?
They need to.
Unless Russia sued for peace, which it could do if Stalin was dead.
Yeah, put a bullet in Stalin's head, done. World War.
You could do that. And sue for peace and hope the Russians would negotiate. And Russia would break up into different countries, and then you'd have to deal with all the individual different countries. So you could have done that, but you would have had large amounts of Russian troops, Konev troops, Zhukov. Zhukov's troops were still intact. They were still in the east. They were still on the way to the Western Front. So all those troops were all committed communists. They would go into Moscow, and Yeah.
The one to Stalin was dead.
Well, I don't know. I really don't know. But it's really a topic for another conversation, not about the Finnish
Anyway,
Army.
we know what happened to Zhukov's troops at the end of the war anyway.
What?
They all died. It was like...
Well, yeah, because it was a meat grinder.
There's a snippet left.
Yeah, it was a meat grinder. Yeah, the Finns managed to avoid all that by suing for peace.
And hiding in trees.
Yeah, they did a lot of that too. But, yeah. Anyway, this is the pack. If you're still actually watching the video at this point, thank you very much. This is these are the basic figures that you get. The heads and some of the grenades and things are actually from the German engineer, the Pioneer box. I had some spare bits and bobs, and given that these are Finns, I thought I'd give them a bandaged head just there, and a anti-tank grenade. Everyone's got a Molotov cocktail, and yeah, I just think they came out all right in the end. So again, is there any questions?
Well, what are their character skills?
Their skills, well, they're just standard infantry, as I said at the beginning. They are regular. You don't have options to make them veteran. I don't know why you don't have options, because they did have
Didn't
elite.
last long enough.
Yeah, but they did have elite troops, which were the ones that were attacking the Russian Motties. Watch out for Russian videos as to what happened there. But the Russians had defensive rings. They formed defensive rings after the offensive stopped, and each ring was sort of separated from each other, and the Finns managed to get in between the rings, the Motties as they were called, and kill them, or persuade them to kill each other. They would fire at the Russians from opposite directions and get the Russians to shell the other Russians. And these were done by small units of troops on skis. Sort of elite units, like no more than 25 men. Basically 2 sections. And they would just sneak in and cause havoc. But you only have the option for regular infantry in the book. They carry SMGs, rifles and light machine guns. Typically there was no standard equipment for the Finnish army. Because they stole a lot of Russian equipment. So although on paper you have one submachine gun assigned to the machine gun team, it would work out in this way. You would have SMG with the machine gun team, you would have the officer who would also have an SMG, and they would turn into squads. I'll just move them around. Oops, sorry. They would turn into squads like this. That's how it would go. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you would have your officer. Sorry, I've done that wrong. That's it. You would have your rifle squad, another rifle squad, and an SMG squad, LMG squad. And as with the German army, the spotter for the light machine gun team will use his submachine gun to keep the enemy's heads down and lend cover fire.
Yeah.
Just like the Germans. The German officer, the reason the German officers carried a MP40, well, this chap here has got a Russian, is that Russian? No, it's actually a Finnish submachine gun, that.
It's an Uzi.
No, not quite.
Looks like it.
The reason the Finnish officers carried, the German officers and Finnish officers carried some machine guns is they would use it to spray at the enemy to keep the enemy's heads down. That's what they used it for. Yeah, that's basically it. That's a Finnish section. 3 fire teams. So, any more questions?
No, that's it.
That's absolutely everything. Okay, right, fine. Video over. Do you want to do the outro?
If you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe, and comment down below what you think of the Finnish just regular infantry.
Yeah, they're just normal standard infantry.
Comment down below what you think of the regular infantry against Russians, because that's really all a lot of people have fought. Same from me.
And everything from him. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.